trying to log in, so Nicole will get those folks in out of the waiting room. But I'm Tom Funstein. I'm the Director of Curriculum Instruction here at the IFTI. I want to welcome you. I see some familiar names there, some that I don't know, but hopefully you will find this course on changing the culture. Obviously, it's a very important course. It's something that has come out of a work group a couple years of Bob Swanson was part of, and some of us, Mike led here at the International. And in other words, a group from the industry got together, and one of the things was one of the final products was this education and training, substance abuse and suicide prevention. So we have run this a few times in Hanover here, but we are still closed here in Hanover. We've been closed since last March. Plans of potentially opening up in April, bring some staff back, but no training probably until June. Actually, here still back in Hanover. So maybe the third time we run this online. I'm trying to think, third time we run it online. So we asked some of you guys went through the online piece, the module, the book. So typically, if this was done in a face-to-face manner, in person, Luke would have a day and Bob would have a day. So you get a day each with our instructors here, and a lot more probably interactivity. So you're going to get a sort of an abbreviated version here, but nonetheless, you get the gist of it. So we want to hopefully you'll find the information here to be obviously beneficial to you, but also more importantly to your members, and you can continue to spread the word as Mike will talk more about the initiative here. So before I hand it over to Mike, I want to introduce you. I'll let Luke, just our two instructors, just briefly introduce themselves. Then I'll pass it back to Mike. So Luke.
Yeah, sure thing.
A little bit of a background on where, maybe how Luke's a local guy from us in Hanover here. So
great. Appreciate that. Hi, all. My name's Luke Dubois. I am clinical director at a treatment facility in Pasadena, Maryland, which is just a couple minutes, 15 minutes south of Baltimore. We're a small 19-bed facility, and I've been working in the substance use dual diagnosis profession for probably about 13, 14 years now. And I appreciate the guys at the IFTI and the IUPAT to bring me on board. That way I can certainly do anything I can to one thing that I like really doing is giving perspective and insight and giving you guys a different perspective. So that way it may not only help you guys and gals, but help the people that you're close to and work with. So very glad to be here.
Thanks, Luke. And again, Luke has taught this a few times with us, and maybe if you were at FIF, I guess it would have been 2019. There was Mike led that group there, so Luke presented there on our behalf. We also have Bob Swanson will be also one of your instructors here. Bob is the former co-chair here, but I'll let him tell more about that. Bob.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm a retired painting contractor, been retired now a little over 5.5 years, and I am so pleased you're joining today. I'm really pleased with this program and what the IUPAT and the FTI have done developing this program. I'm a suicide loss survivor, and that's why I'm with you today. Our oldest son, Michael, died by suicide on March 13th, 2009. At the age of 33. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you today, I've learned since his death. And I don't want any one of you to be in the position I was in where upon Michael's death, I knew very little about mental illness. I knew very little about even the potential of suicide. So this is part of my healing. And hopefully I can help you and the members you represent and those of you that are instructors, the students you work with every day. So I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke, Bob and Luke for that, for those introductions. And I think I see some housekeeping things in there again before I turn over to Mike, and I would encourage you, if you haven't finished up the online piece, go ahead and do that. And if it's something you want to take and you didn't take it, maybe reach out to Nicole. She'll make sure we get you registered to take that as well. And then at the end, there is an end of the course survey. We ask that you please take that. That's for our records. It's also if we can help clean up the curriculum, help the instructors with some feedback for from that perspective. And I know Nicole will make sure that that happens towards the end. So again, we want to welcome you here to the class, and thank you for coming on. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mike, he's the IUPAT point of contact here, and has been really spearheading this effort and really making a lot of great inroads with what this work group has started. I guess they'll tell you, but it's got to be at least a couple of years that they've been working at this. So thanks again. And Mike, it is all yours.
Hi, Tom. Thank you. And it's great to be here with Bob and Luke once again. As Tom said, I'm Mike Hines. I'm working with the Helping Hand Initiative and the implementation procedures that we're taking in all of our district councils in the IUPAT. And I'd like to welcome you all today. We're going to cover several things concerning the Helping Hand Initiative and obviously changing the culture of construction. And I just want to thank Bob and Luke. It's always great to be with them and presenting changing the culture of construction. And we're fortunate to have you both with us today to provide us a greater understanding of substance use disorder, suicide, and mental health. And having a perspective of the complexities that someone with mental health issues is experiencing gives us the compassion and patience needed to see them through the situations that they're facing. Changing the culture of construction is our greatest foundational tool to provide the members education in substance use disorder, suicide prevention, and mental health issues for the Helping Hand Initiative. The educational components of changing the culture of construction on the LMS provides the foundation on which we build Helping Hand for the future and provide IUPAT members and employers the tools and resources they need to receive immediate help and support for themselves and their family. I'm asking you today, if you've not already done so, begin the champion process and support training, changing the culture of construction in your training centers this spring. In August of 2019, at the 32nd General Convention of the IUPAT in Las Vegas, General President Rigmaiden spoke passionately about the IUPAT Helping Hand. And GP Rigmaiden declared Resolution 12 to the body that no IUPAT member will be left behind for support in substance use disorder and suicide prevention, including mental health. Let me read this Resolution 12 for you that was declared that day. Whereas the suicide rate for construction workers is the highest among all industries in the United States and Canada, and whereas suicide and substance use abuse overdose rate for the IUPAT members is approximately 10%, and whereas studies report that 15% of construction workers suffer from substance use disorder, and whereas these heartbreaking issues are sure to have affected the families of every single one of us sitting in this delegation today, and whereas we as leaders of our union have the duty and responsibility to protect our fellow brothers and sisters by providing the materials and resources for help. Therefore, be it resolved that every IUPAT district council implement the IUPAT Helping Hand and changing the culture of construction program within the next 5 years. So here we are, a year and a half later since GP Rigmaiden made that statement. One extraordinary year and a half later, never seen before in our lifetimes, faced with way too many challenges to even list. But here we are, we're moving it forward. In the last year, Helping Hand champions have been named for all IUPAT district councils. Canada and the Western, Central, and Eastern regions have all engaged in Zoom conference call monthly meetings and are well on the way to building IUPAT Helping Hand teams in every district council. We must ensure that there's a system in place to identify and provide mental health services to members and employers in need of support. The IUPAT Helping Hand Initiative is that system of support. In this last year, with the challenges of COVID, we have found that we can and we will present changing the culture of construction through webinars as we're doing today. This session being our 4th webinar since April of 2020. So we're coming together because why? Well, we are union. We see a need and we feel the need. Many of you have heard me talk about what Helping Hand would look like in 10, 20, 30 years. Much like CPR first aid, changing the culture of construction and mental health first aid will be taught in every training center. It becomes part of the culture. Those of us that are champions of the Helping Hand Initiative have a vision as to what this looks like as a successful IUPAT program. The stigma of a brother or sister coming forward and saying, I need help, that's removed. Substance use disorder, substantially decreased, if not eliminated. Suicide, substantially decreased, if not eliminated. Mental health and wellness restored to members, brothers, sisters, employers, and their families. Training and support resources in all IUPAT district councils. Lives being saved and hope regained. So the work continues in all our IUPAT district councils, but we want you and we need you to come alongside of us. Become part of building your district council's Helping Hand teams. Be a visionary, support your council champion. Be prepared to give support and resources when that time comes. And it will come when somebody reaches out and says, I need help. My life is out of control. So here's just an example of IUPAT Helping Hand. We're learning about how to handle the inevitable when somebody is in a mental health situation or even a crisis. Who do they turn to? Who can they trust? Is it you? Do you know the steps to help someone in a mental health crisis? There may not be time to pass them off to someone else or tell, hey, let me get back to you on that and I'll get you an answer. They need mental health, or they need immediate help for mental health right away. And that's where mental health first aid training comes in. Mental health first aid aims to teach how to respond to a mental health emergency and offer support to someone who appears to be in emotional distress. The IUPAT Helping Hand Initiative is currently working with recovery resources and our district councils to train counsel and training staffs in mental health first aid. It's an 8-hour investment in education to meet the mental health need when it arises. This training provides the attendee a 3-year mental health first aid certification and from the National Council of Behavioral Health. This week, mental health first aid is being delivered in 2 sessions to 42 attendees in District Council 711 and in District Council 16. So here we are from California and Nevada all the way to New Jersey. By the time we complete the training, hundreds and hundreds in position of leadership in the IUPA district councils will be trained and prepared to meet the mental health need when it arises. Our DC Council 35 has 2 leaders on staff right now that have been certified in mental health first aid, as well as training and changing the culture of construction. And they're now training apprentices. And that's the goal for all our councils, training mental health first aid and changing the culture of construction. So I could just go on, but I won't. I want to turn it over to Luke, but I will be back a little later in the session. So again, I want to thank you all for your commitment to come into the webinar today and learning about changing the culture of construction and serving our members and employers through the Helping Hand Initiative. So Luke, it's good to have you here.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. And then if Nicole or Tom can give me I'm good to go until what time, so that way I can be mindful of it. I forget to ask that every session we do this. So Nicole or Tom, give me a little heads up. So yeah, like I said earlier, my name's Luke Dubois, and I'm the clinical director at Tranquility Woods. And I was talking to Tom a couple of years ago at this point, and he asked me if I could come on and help with this training and this teaching. And I always laughed because I asked exactly what was the curriculum or the focus. And he said, well, you know, changing the culture of construction, changing the culture of anything, let alone construction. I got to laugh at that. And he really made me think, and how do we best do that when it comes to substance use and mental health? And, you know, you guys are doing that, you know, you're those sayings and slogans, and, you know, and it's funny, they can seem silly or cheesy, but they're really not. helping hand. That's literally what we're doing. We want the hand of another professional, another coworker to be there and be supportive. And that's how the culture really changes. And I think that's what this is all about. And working together, we get to save lives. So when Tom gave me that information, I said, okay, I can work with that. So in addition to me being a clinical social worker and a certified addiction counselor, I've been sober myself for 14 years. I had no intention of being in this profession. I was working on being a certified athletic trainer, the guys that go out and do tape jobs and rehab and prevention of injuries. But this career and passion found me, as well as sobriety. And I think some of the things that you guys and gals are doing give other people that opportunity to help save lives. So thank you all for being here and help changing the culture. So what I'm going to do is share my screen. About how long do I have, Tom? To what time?
Oh, sorry, Luke. This is Nicole. You have right until 3 o'clock. So
Yeah, perfect.
yeah.
Thanks. All right. You all see that?
Yep.
Right, good. As I give my presentation, one thing that I always say during my 45 minutes, an hour that I have, I'm certainly going to do a lot of talking, but this works a whole lot better for me and you guys if you all give me your perspectives. I appreciate you guys and gals showing your windows and your faces. If you're open to that. I always say if I don't see you guys in Zoom, it's like me doing a group with everyone wearing bags over their heads. So thank you for having your camera on, and by all means, at any point, I want you guys to jump in, thoughts, questions. I'm probably going to ask you guys questions as we do this hour. Okay, so that's where I work. It's fancy looking. We have 19 clients, and I say we get people comfortable to get them uncomfortable. Some of the things that I'm going to focus on while we're here is these two things mainly. You know, how is the brain really affected by the substances that people use, and what does it look like when they go through it, whether it's a place like here, any form of recovery, and that early part of work. And I can put a third on here. How do we deal with a pandemic in a pandemic? You know, I always say in my profession, I've been dealing with the pandemic since I've gotten into the field. Now we're just throwing another one on there with COVID, and how does it affect your guys' jobs and as well? Okay. Move this out of the way. So one of the things I want to talk about, we say this is a brain disease, and when I was in treatment, I was really confused of how this thing is a disease when I am putting substances in my body. So how can someone say this is a disease when I'm consuming the substance, liquid, powder, smoke, you name it? And one of the reasons why that is, and we're going to talk a lot about the brain behind this addiction, is this neurotransmitter or this substance in our brain, our natural chemical called dopamine. I always say in the 90s and 2000s, people would say, "Oh man, that's really dope." Well, it's actually a legitimate saying. And one of the reasons is when you release and you have a pleasurable stimuli, it releases dopamine in the brain. It's a feel good. So we get that when we finish our job on time or ahead of time. We get that pleasurable stimuli with sex. We get it with food. We can get it with exercise. We can get it with laughter. So when we release that chemical, and now we're doing so by a substance, our brain goes, "I really like that." And then it records it and saying, "Okay, I like it so much." And with substances, with drugs and alcohol, it really works and we really like it. So much so that it's much more powerful, it's much more intense, and it's quicker to do than meeting a goal at work or meeting a deadline or any other ways that we feel good, right? Now, we also know we get that with sex, we can get that with gambling, we can get that with other addictions that aren't you know, eating and things like that. And it kind of works the same way, but with substances, we're doing even more kind of, I'll call it brain damage, and I'll explain that in a second. Since we're telling the brain, not only are we telling it feels good, you can see this part right here where it says, we tell the brain that it's important in order to survive. So not only is it a feel good, we are rewiring our brain and how we remember it, that we need this stimuli. We need this to function. We need this to feel good. And then it's becoming a dependency, not just physically, but also psychologically, mentally, and emotionally. We are rewiring our brain that we need to use this substance to feel good. And as progression happens, we need this substance to feel different. So I always laugh at, you know, people come to my facility and they would say, man, I want to get sober. I have the will to get sober. If this was a desire thing, if this was just a choice, this wouldn't be a pandemic, right? So sometimes I give people perspective. Man, I really tried to will myself from no longer having that headache. I tried to will myself no longer to have diabetes. I willed myself not to have cancer. And excuse my language, I willed myself not to shit my pants from the diarrhea I had. My point being, if it was just about desire and willpower, this wouldn't be an epidemic. There's a little literal change in our brain that makes this a brain disease. So recovery is letting our brain to heal, but also rewiring our brain, meaning doing things different, allowing ourselves to not have that quick fix and feel good. And it takes a lot of time, which is why relapse is chronic and a big thing for a lot of people, because it takes time to rewire our brain to trigger those brain chemistry, that brain chemistry to feel okay. Does that make sense so far? All right, I saw a head nod or two. So this is the brain, whole lot of words on here.
Hey, Luke, sorry, it's Nicole. We're not seeing, we're not seeing that screen where the brain picture is.
All right.
Yeah, no, screen sharing has not been friendly to the Zoom lately. I feel like something changed.
You know, presenter mode. You're seeing your notes.
Give me 1 second. That again. Are we there?
Oh, yep. Perfect.
So we just went over this about the dopamine, okay? Here's a picture of the brain. There's a whole lot of letters and words in here. It's just to give you guys a visual specifically of how our brain is damaged, okay? And our brain is damaged from top to bottom. So meaning we have this part of the brain here, that's the top. If you think about, hey, we're forward thinkers, so what does that mean? We use this part of our brain that's responsible for planning, logic, reason, executive functioning, okay? So after we damage that, we damage the midbrain and lower brain, and I'm going to get into that specifically why that's an issue and why recovery can be really challenging, okay? Back to a brain disease. Here's a statistic. Brain dysfunction has been documented that up to 75 to 95% of all people with substance use or recovering alcoholics have brain dysfunction. 75 to 95%. Does that surprise you guys? That 75 to 95% of all recovering addicts and alcoholics that have been tested have brain dysfunction. Well, if it rubs you the wrong way, let me know. Recovery from the nervous system. The nervous system is the brain and spinal cord. Damage usually takes 6 months to 2 years to really begin to heal itself. So if you think about the central nervous system, if anyone's had a surgery, right? For example, ACL tear, a shoulder impingement, and you cut through a nerve, it gets numb, right? And it can take, you know, the nerves, if you severed it through a surgery, takes months and years to regenerate before you can feel it again. Now, from using substances, we're not severing our nerves, but what we're doing, one of the reasons that alcoholic drinking, binge drinking is 5 or 6, not because that sounds good, that we have this organ over here, right? That over to the left side of your body that filters it. And when you have a kidney that does 400 or 500 different things and you're filling it with alcohol, it stops doing almost every other function except one, getting rid of that alcohol. It can't get rid of it that quickly when you consume 5 or 6 drinks in a certain amount of time, and it has to send it somewhere. So all of a sudden, the alcohol breaks the blood-brain barrier and starts smothering and damaging your brain, and also damaging your organs in your kidney. If you smoke, it goes right to your lungs, say with whether it's PCP, whether it's heroin, whether it's cannabis, it breaks the blood-brain barrier from your lungs and goes to your brain. If you do IV heroin, blood to the brain. If you snort cocaine, straight to your brain. All these drugs are mind-altering, mood-altering, but they begin to damage the brain and how it functions. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Once again, here's an example of the brain. We damage it top to bottom. So the cerebral cortex, the midbrain, and the lower brain, and I'll touch upon that as well. So after people stop using, they go through a detox period. And if you think of detox, remove the toxins, and that can often take 7 to 14 days. Now, an insurance might say that'll take 5 to 10 days, but just because in insurance, if you're at a detox or a hospital or a treatment facility, your brain is still going through the detoxification period. And when it does that, you go through this thing that I call post-acute withdrawal. So after the acute withdrawal, after the detox, your brain and body has a bunch of symptoms after the detox, right? So if we look that your brain can take 6 to 24 months, these symptoms of recovery can take up to 6 months to 2 years to really get better, which is one of the reasons why I'm a big advocate for treatment. If someone goes to a detox or an inpatient facility, right, we should start treating this like stage 4, stage 5 cancer. When you're going to a detox facility, you're going to an inpatient facility that you need, a couple weeks to not only get it out of your system, but really begin to treat all aspects of this disease. So yeah, there's detox, but one of the reasons why this is a pandemic and relapse occurs so often are these things that I have on this PowerPoint. That it's not just, if you've got cancer and you do a couple rounds of chemo, you're not done. That there's still post-op and things that should happen. Same thing with surgeries. If you have a surgery and you tear your ACL, yeah, you're going to do the immediate surgery, which is like a stabilization period, which is like a detox. But then there should be follow-up. There should be physical therapy, right? And that's just the physical piece. We have this addiction, this pandemic that's not just physical. It's mental and emotional. And some people say spiritual. I always say the liquor stores says beer, wine, and spirits. I think it takes away the spiritual aspect of people. So one of the things that we do is we give people spirituality to help them as a coping skill and support, which is really important when we have a pandemic as well, with lack of connection and hope and things like that. So first thing, inability to think clearly. There's a reason. We talked about that 75 to 95% of addicts have a brain disorder. One of the reasons why we have the inability to think clearly is this part of the brain. Part of the brain that's responsible for logic and reasoning. That is the first part of the brain that we damage first. So whether it's you guys as coworkers, you guys as a boss, you guys and gals with your family members, and someone is actively using, and they're trying to justify and rationalize while they're doing the things that they're doing, and we're going, what the heck are you doing and why you're doing it? And what does the active addict or alcoholic say? Oh, I'm fine, I'm good. Yeah, but rationalization, all those things that we see with use. One of the reasons that happens is because they damage the logical, executive functioning brain. Does that make sense? What do you guys think about that? Give me some of your feedback before I keep going. What are your guys' initial thoughts with that as we're halfway through this?
Luke, this is Mike Marashi from Boston. I'm digesting what you're saying, and I'm thinking back to when, when I initially got sober, and a lot of I didn't have any insurance or any money left, and I couldn't afford, there was no way I was getting. Well, I didn't think there was any way I could get into treatment. I didn't know about the resources that are available for somebody that is at that point. But I went to meetings, all AA meetings. That's what I did. I heard the things that you're talking about, and I just took it as it was working for other people. It's nice to have all the information, about why it works the way it works, about why treatment would be a good alternative for a lot of people because of the support you get in somebody that's trained in doing the work. And I really didn't know why I was in that fog or that mucus that everyone talks about, and why it took so long to lift. So I'm getting those answers now.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is really important and valuable. Thank you.
Good. And that's, I think, one of the things that the IFTI is doing for you guys and gals to see, whether it's for yourself or the people you work with, for the people that need help, that luckily the IFTI has an EAP program. You guys have the insurance to help people that need help, whether it's for the mental health or the substance use or dual diagnosis. And that's part of the helping hand, and it's to your point, right? That memory problem. If you drink, this is statistic just for more perspective. If you drink, where do I have it here? Memory problems. If you consume 5 drinks in one night, it can affect your brain and body activity for 3 days. If you consume 5 drinks in 2 consecutive nights, it can affect your brain and body activity for 5 days. Now compound that for days, weeks, months, years, and decades for some people drinking. Well, man, that's going to play a toll in the people to think clearly or memory problems. Now, this medical model goes really right in hand with 12-step model. Step 1 in Alcoholics or Narcotics Anonymous says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. Why has it become unmanageable? Well, man, I can't think clearly. Step 2 says I need to be restored to sanity. Well, I lack soundness of mind, reason of mind, because the way I cope is with substances and I can't think clearly. So the medical model and 12 steps go hand in hand. There's a reason why Alcoholics Anonymous and 12 steps has a wonderful success rate, because if people continue to go, their slogans again, keep it simple. What do? We complicate it. We make a mountain out of a molehill, whether it's for stress and things like that. And people that are emotionally, mentally, or physically dependent on substances, all of a sudden we take that away from them. So when people come back to work, they're in a different brain state. So things that they did naturally, that they didn't have to think about, that was in an altered state, they're coming back after, whether it's 2 weeks, a month, 2 months of treatment, and they're thrown right back into it, and their brain is also in a different state. So things, when I went back to school, I remember trying to read a paragraph because I have a paper due the next day and it didn't absorb. So then I read that paragraph out loud and I promise you it didn't absorb. So I tried to do it over and over again. And my best thought was, you know what, let me go down the hall in this dorm. Let me buy that Adderall. I'm not going to smoke or drink on it. I'm going to take it as prescribed for that person. I'll be able to focus. That was my thought process. So people that come back into any profession, whether it's computer work, whether it's hands-on work, whether it's in a house, whether it's drywall painting, whatever it is, may not seem second nature because we adjusted when we're in active use. We became functionally dysfunctional. we take that away and the brain is changing and it's literally contracting and expanding, going, what is my normal steady state? What is my normal amount of dopamine, serotonin? And it can take up to 6 months to 2 years to really begin to heal itself. And that's going to lead to emotional overreaction, isn't it? The emotional roller coaster. I call it the happy, mad, glad, sad in the same conversation, let alone the same hour. And people are coming back to their families if they go to detox or residential treatment, and they need time to process these things. The brain is trying to heal itself, so we can have that emotional overreaction. So that's the second part that gets damaged. The midbrain, which is responsible for memory and emotion. We damage the logical brain, the ability to think clearly. Then we damage this part, the midbrain, which is responsible for the emotions. One people use, I say this, this is my favorite example. Man, the Ravens won, let's go get messed up. Let's have a few drinks. The Ravens lost, let's go get messed up. Let's have a few drinks. So that emotions, the ability to identify what we're actually feeling, I call it emotional sobriety, and begin to make sense of it instead of just numbing it out or making me feel good, that is gone if you're no longer drinking or drugging again. So these are some of the transitions, let alone the stress when it comes back to your trade or your job or whatever you're going back to, and you got all eyes on you. And all of a sudden they're thinking and they're trying to cope with it, and we put our own stress on ourselves. So as a helping hand, we can begin to communicate with them. Of course there's expectations of a job, but I don't know about you guys, but no one put more, no jail cell could punish me more than I could punish myself. Right? So whether it's guilt, shame, or worry or concern, I was going to punish myself more than other people. So, part of this helping hand is letting people know it's okay as they transition back to the workplace if they do get help, or letting them know it's okay to take time off and get help because you're going to be even better in the long run when you do. Sleep disturbances. Boy, I wish that wasn't a thing, but it is, especially with substances. People often pass out and come to, it's true. There's two kinds of waves sleep. One is that REM, rapid eye movement, and the one is that slow wave cycle. When people are using throughout the day and up to 6 hours before they go to sleep, it can mess up their sleep cycle. So a lot of people, when they're in detox or if they're in a residential facility, and that can happen for weeks and months afterwards, that their brain is used to shutting down and not getting that slow wave cycle. Sleep is good for two things. Your immune system, when you have a fever or flu, what do you want to do? You want to go to sleep. Your body's trying to heal itself. And also, sleep can help with stress. If you ever had a bad day, a rough day, and then you go to sleep and you wake up and you're not so angry at your boss or your wife, well, there's a reason for that, because sleep can actually help with stress. Now, when you don't get that sleep, because your brain is used to not getting that slow wave cycle, once again, for weeks, months, years, or decades, that sometimes it doesn't come back right away. So, and then some people may become dependent on sleeping medications and stuff like that. So that's a challenging one for a lot of people, that sleep disturbances. Physical coordination, it's 2:40. Physical coordination, once again, the brain is healing, so people's hand-eye coordination, balance, dexterity, and things like that might be off for a while, especially the older you get and the more damage you do to yourself. And lastly, and certainly not least, stress and anxiety sensitivity. One of the reasons people drink and drug is to feel good or feel different. That is now gone. We took away one of their most unhealthiest coping skills, and I don't care how old you are, we're learning how to cope without substances and drugs and alcohol. So ironically, one of the things that makes post-acute withdrawal worse is also a symptom, stress and anxiety. So here's the thing with how the brain heals. The brain is damaged top to bottom. It heals bottom up. The bottom part of the brain, after the memory and emotions is the primitive brain. This is the survival brain. So these are things like heartbeat and breathing and things like that. But this is also typically when people think, man, I'm not that bad because I didn't have to choose drinking or drugging over my family or my work, right? So, oh, I'm not that bad. I'm not the brown bag. I'm not living under a bridge. I can't be an addict or alcoholic. I'm good. I'm fine. But I assure you, I work at a facility that has lawyers, executives, Yale to jail, Park Avenue to Park Bench. I see all walks of life at my rehab. And a lot of them try to convince themselves because they were running businesses and successful financially that they didn't damage this part of their brain. But the more they're here, they realize just how much they prioritize their substance use over a lot of other things, which if you look at it in 12 steps, the powerlessness and unmanageability. We don't have to lose everything for us to be an addict or an alcoholic, but we sure do justify and rationalize with this, the logical brain, to convince us it's not that bad. So it's heels bottom up. All of a sudden, I want a roof over my head. I want to make sure I have, I'm getting to keep my job. I can't do that. I can't lose my job, the money. I don't want my husband or wife to kick me out. I got to know where I'm going to live, survival. And then all of a sudden, guess what comes back? The emotions, the memory, because that's damaged. How we remember things in active use might be altered or distorted. And people in early recovery start having those light bulb moments, those aha moments, things that they forgot start coming to the surface. The emotions start coming back. We're not numb anymore. The emotions come back before what? Our ability to make logic and reason and ration out of those emotions, which is why when people leave a detox or a residential facility like where I work, I always recommend more aftercare, whether it's intensive outpatient, whether it's addiction counseling, whether it's 12 steps, whether it's, there's all kinds of different, there's Buddhists in the 12 steps, there's Celebrate Recovery, there's all kinds of different support groups to help people, as well as other forms of treatment in terms of relapse prevention groups and intensive outpatients where they go to continue to process them back into life without using substances and having that support. Thoughts or questions?
Hi, Luke. I'm Andy Hernandez. I was just going to comment because I have family members who have suffered from major addiction, and one lost their battle via suicide. But understanding where people are coming from when their brain is sick in this manner, you don't always think about, you think, well, they're addicted, but the aspects of all the way down from the primitive brain up to the logical thing helps you to come at a person in a different way to help them to get into treatment or to follow through with treatment, because it seems like in the instant gratification world that we live in, that I stopped using, I should be better, or I don't have an issue because I'm not using now. But there's a lot more to it that I guess I didn't really understand.
The long-term recovery, the continuing progression of, we know the progression of addiction and disease and the spiral downwards, but I always relate it to an emotion like that roller coaster. You guys can see me, right? I think you can, right?
Yes.
So when you're in active use, it's like this, right? In recovery, you're still gonna have ups and downs and turns, but with treatment and support, you're still having those ups and downs in that roller coaster. It's just going in this progression as opposed to this way if you're doing the treatment. If you can, some of these things we put on this slide, if you're staying in touch with support. Because once again, family members, and thank you for sharing that, see things like, to Andy's point, that when you're in active use, we've got this, right? We've only got our perspective and early recovery active use, and it can be hard to get a different perspective, especially when substances are doing everything to literally kill us. That's the whole job of addiction, is to kill us. Why it's a pandemic. So it's hard to really begin to open our minds and our hearts, which is why aftercare outside of a detox and a residential facility is so important to continue that treatment. So what I help people do here is identify their emotional states, right? And actually begin to feel. Now I know as a society, we don't always like to do that, but we're not robots. We get to feel all signs. If I can feel happy, joyous, and free, and serenity and peace, well, it's very human to feel anger, resentment, frustration, and fear. That is a normal human feeling. And being able to process both and not having to use a substance is for that. Daily routine is big. That's been challenged with COVID. COVID has really exponentially affected substance use and addiction and relapse because people's routines are off. A lot of people are lacking the support that they had in fellowships and in-person meetings and things outside of work for a lot of people. Find ways to reduce stress, like exercise. When you do exercises, it releases those good dopamine in a good way, and you start rewiring your brain that, oh, this is enough. This is a feel good. Patience and understanding. That's with us as a helping hand. Patience and understanding, because once again, we have a different perspective than the active user and the person in early recovery. Allow time to care for your spiritual self and do things that bring healthy comfort. I'm just as guilty with this pandemic. It's been a year of having a baby and looking over a treatment facility 24/7, 365, that I can certainly get lost, lose myself. So I certainly have to take care of myself with my recovery and my emotional well-being. So being able to do things for myself and finding that balance, I think we can all relate to different forms of that, especially with the pandemic. Give yourself time to heal in for your brain disease. And part of that is time, but a lot of that is treatment. I think I drove home the point, but here's 2 examples. This doctor shared that you don't treat a chronic illness for 4 weeks and then send a patient to a support group. People with a chronic form of addiction need all forms of treatment. I'm an advocate. I'm active in 12-step recovery. But that's a support group that helps me with my spirituality and helps me with my addiction. But looking at addiction in all aspects is really important. So continuing treatment, as we mentioned before, with relapse prevention, therapists, IOP, and things like that can only help the other aspects of someone's recovery and vice versa. This is just an example of different forms of treatment. We've got detox, rehab, residential, sober housing, IOPs, and really beginning to look at this as the continuum of care. It's not just stop using and going through detox. If it takes the brain 6 to 24 months, well, maybe it's a good idea, and it's not maybe, it is a good idea to get treatment and support for up to 2 years and even longer. This is just explaining what I just said. No doctor would help a patient control his blood sugar or blood pressure once and then wave goodbye. The same should be true for this. You don't just do a surgery or, we tend to be a quick fix society and think everything's all right after we treat a symptom, but looking at underlying causes and conditions is vital. Functional treatment is functional sobriety. Here's my equation for recovery. Abstinence, not using, plus treatment, plus action, doing something different, that equals recovery. There's a reason why there's people relapse, and that's because they may not continue to work on parts of self, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. We can have all the insight in the world, but it does not equal change. People go to therapy all the time and have wonderful insight. They still have a toxic marriage, or they still have that trauma from when they were children, or they still have that issue with their boss, or they still have that, right? So we can have all the insight in the world. Doesn't mean we're going to change. So part of what I do is help people get their strength and power back and help them identify what they actually can change we're so caught up in things that we can't change, which makes it challenging and leads to resentment and numbing out and feeling. Other questions, thoughts? We got a handful more minutes. I'd like to hear your takeaways from that.
Hey, Luke, this is Steve LeFevre, DC30. Quick question for you. With treatment and rehab, do they treat the family or just the victim?
So I'll say it this way, the good ones do, okay? Because as you see, that's a big part of it. So where I work, we have 19 clients. They're here from anywhere from 28 days to 2 months. And they get 3 individual sessions a week, a mental health session a week, and one of those 3 is a family session. And every Sunday we have family education. So they get 1 family session a week and family education with client and family involvement. So they get 2 things every week. Because the reality, what is one of the most stressful things that people go back to? Family, home. That's one of the biggest triggers and stressors. So that is an integral part about our program. And I think more and more programs can't deny that and have to include that with their programs, because if they want people to be successful, that's something that has to be a part of the program. So it would be my recommendation that when it comes to treatment, if you can have someone that inpatient facility that really focuses on that. A lot of our aftercare for our clients is continuing the couples or the families therapy that they start with us, that they do 3 or 4 family sessions with and 3 or 4 family educations with, that they are identifying their triggers or stressors. And I say, clients aren't the only toxic or sick ones. As family members, right? We get trained by the disease. As an active addict, I trained my loved ones. I got my family members to walk on eggshells so that way I didn't have to change. So part of the family disease is identifying what the family can do to help themselves, regardless of what the client does. What the family can do for boundaries, because boundaries are for ourselves, they're not for the other person. So that way I have my peace and sanity as a family member, right? So that's a huge piece in the recovery process. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions?
Luke, I have a question. It's Nicole.
Yeah.
Perspective wise, your perspective on sort of the isolation and the things that we're feeling due to COVID in the realm in which you are. What is your perspective on how that non-interaction, right? That we're all sort of working from home, that you've seen sort of in your neck of the woods and the effect that that's having on people's treatment?
It's a big reason for relapse, whether we're in recovery or not. I mean, it's just the isolation, the lack of connection and unity and community as a species is so important. And a lot of that has been taken away from us. So compound that with substance use. We've seen so much relapse because you do have to work harder in the recovery process to stay connected, to have that accountability, to have that support. Luckily, we're in an age where there's so many 12-step meetings and outpatients are telehealth kind of in this format. But to say that you can connect to another person as good as you can, you can't, right? So I'm an optimist, but a realist. Yeah, we've been able to adapt. We do our family sessions like this, the family education like this while our clients are here. But it's a challenge. So whether you have an addiction or not, the percentage of the mental health, the depression and the anxiety, the stress is through the roof. I've always had job security. I've got more job security now, unfortunately. Yeah, we've got to consciously make these efforts, and I'm I know there's silver linings through this because now it's even more accessible to get treatment with the internet and Zoom and things like that. So there's some positives behind it, but the amount of conscious effort that, we have COVID groups for the clients. How do you reach out and get help? How do you, say you're new if you're going to AA or NA or Chemical Dependency Anonymous, and you don't have that connection where someone can sweep you up and help you right away. How can you make that connection to, you don't have any friends that are sober, and all of a sudden you're going back home and you're semi-isolated. So we spend a lot of time transitioning with being realistic about that. So, and we all feel it. I was transparent with you guys, right? No, I got my kids in my work, and I can lose my part of my well-being because of it. So it takes a conscious effort.
Thank you.
I think, Luke, that just goes to show you how important it is for all of us to gather those around us to provide us that support, our union brothers and sisters during this time of pandemic, and what we're trying to build with the Helping Hand initiative in our district councils, in building our teams, gives us even more desire to continue that work and build on what we began.
Absolutely.
Luke, Andy Hernandez again, can I ask, with us, many of us participating in the Helping Hands, is there something that you could recommend that is a good starting point to maybe start the conversation with someone who maybe hasn't come to us directly with saying, hey, I have a problem and I need help, but not being super forward or presumptive, but kind of opening the door to conversation to help individuals realize that we're here and we want to help get them to where they might want to be it now or in the future if they decide that they want to make that change.
The first thing that came to mind, because there's so much context of, that we have to consider, right? And I know that, but the first thing that came to my mind is, if you guys speak from the heart with care and concern, you can't go wrong. Our intention is help and be supportive. And the other thing, from how do I know if I'm speaking from the heart? I know my motives and my intentions to be helpful and supportive, but also I get to identify some facts. Hey, I've noticed that, you just haven't been yourself. You're not laughing as much, or you've been taking some time off, or you've been late. And I just want to speak from the heart. You can identify the facts, things that you're worried about as a friend or a coworker or support. And you get to speak from the heart and identify the facts. And it's up to that person to go from there. So without knowing all the context and variables, can't go wrong with that.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. I'll still be here if you want to give me a chat, but I know there might be some Q&A afterwards. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Luke. I think we're gonna, Mr. Swanson, are you ready to do your presentation, sir?
I am ready.
All right, let me get ready because I'm not.
Thank you, Luke.
So while we're queuing up Bob, one of the important things that Luke brought up is building those relationships, and that's what our champions are doing in their district councils, and building trust. I think that's one of the most important things that we can do, is build trust amongst our members and our employers, and being consistent with what we're presenting with the Helping Hand program, with changing the culture of construction, with mental health first aid. And in doing that's going to continue this process in all of our district councils. And not only in our district councils, but in every walk of life that we might find someone and meet someone. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. I guess I'm ready to go. I want to preface my presentation with a few things. One, I have had no training in mental health. I've learned a lot since my son's death. I think I have a very good understanding of the industry in that I spent 45 years in the industry, both in the field and in the office. And I realized for a lot of years I was doing things the wrong way. So we all learn. And another thing I want to say is some of this might be uncomfortable, and I don't want to cause any harm to any of you. So if something all of a sudden triggers, I would suggest you mute my presentation and that you come back in when it's okay. The next thing I want to say is I usually start my presentations when they're in person, and when we have it at Hanover, I just ask people to reflect on the impact suicides may be had on them. And then I ask people to raise their hand if they've been impacted by someone that they've known has died by suicide. And it's almost 100% every time, no matter if the audience is 10 or if it's up to, I've had audiences up to 500. And yet we don't know what to do about it. We don't know how to talk about it. And then that creates a lot of pain for us as survivors, but also I would say we're all survivors. We've all been impacted. So one of our recent calls for the Central Region, we had a question, what do you say? And I'm going to have in my blog coming up in another month some talk about that, but I want to just mention it. If somebody's had a loss of loved one to suicide, think of it like any other death. And we as a society don't like to talk about death, but it is a reality. And now we know even more so with COVID. But show compassion, like Luke said. It isn't what you say near as much as to show that you care. And believe it or not, with the death of our son, it's been totally different than the death of my parents. I've lost both parents, and I've also lost a brother. And people were passionate, and they were caring, and they would ask about different dates. I'm sure you're missing your mom at the holidays or whatever. And on the other hand, many people have treated us like we have leprosy because our son died by suicide. We've lost friends. We've had people just ignore the topic. If I feel like talking about it, some people immediately change the subject. So that just really promotes that whole thing of shame and blame. So I just wanted to start with that. So next slide, Nicole. So all illnesses are similar. They have similarities, whether it's physical or mental. Many are difficult to diagnose. In our son's case, he was diagnosed in his early teens with clinical depression. Again, I've learned a lot. I now know misdiagnosis of adolescence is very common because our brains don't fully develop until our mid to late 20s. So he lived with a misdiagnosis until his first attempt on his life at age 29. So for probably over 10 years, he was being treated for an illness that he didn't have. And that really, in retrospect, I just feel for all that he had to go through. Oftentimes there's co-occurring illnesses. Luke mentioned that. In our son's case, Michael had 4 illnesses of the brain. Bipolar disorder 1, seasonal affective disorder, anxiety disorder, and substance use disorder with alcohol. And they all really contributed to a bad situation. Range of severity, very important. So many illnesses have a range of severity. It can be minor, or just medication, watching your diet, exercising. You can have a totally normal functioning life. And all illnesses have that potential to be super severe where you're hospitalized, you're unable to cope with normal tasks. So it's no different with mental illnesses. Then let's talk about side effects from medication. Michael had a number of medications he was taking. If you look at any medication you're taking, they all have side effects. Or I watch TV every now and then, and they'll have a medication, and they'll of course rattle off all the side effects. And my first reaction always is, why even take it? So of course, whether it's physical or mental, if that medication's making you feel worse or not addressing your ailment, what do? You quit taking it. Our son was no different. The flip side is, what do you do if suddenly that medication's helping you feel better? Well, it's common to, again, not take it. So let me use myself. Over a year ago, I let something go too long, being a stubborn male, and I had a serious infection in one of my toes. Went to the doctor, and I finally went because it hurt so darn much. And he prescribed a very strong antibiotic, told me to take it twice a day for 14 days. After about 4 or 5 days, the pain was pretty much gone. The swelling was pretty much gone. It was an easy temptation to say, I don't need that anymore, but I continued to take it. Same with medications. I can think of an instance where for a while, the anxiety disorder for our son was really a problem, where he was really unable to even leave the house. And he started feeling better. New medication. The big temptation was to quit taking it. Again, that's not a good idea. And then Luke's mentioned the relapses. It fits physical illnesses and mental illnesses. Our recovery is not a straight line. It's ups and downs. All illnesses have that. Two most common mental illnesses are anxiety disorder and depression. The key I want you to remember, they're all treatable. All illnesses are nobody's fault. We should put no blame for someone's illness. Next slide. So why do we treat physical and mental illnesses different? I would submit a big part of this is it's easy to have empathy with somebody with a physical illness because it's visible. And maybe we've had that illness. Because of the shame with mental illnesses, it's hard to have empathy. And more importantly, it's not visible. So we got to remember these are illnesses. Nobody wants them. And I thought Luke said a very good point. We can't will our way out of these. Nobody worked harder at his therapy plan than our son. If willpower would have saved him, he'd still be here. It had nothing to do with willpower. We typically say, well, he's weak. I just got to really discount that. It's totally false. Next slide. So what are some common traits? And these are general, but typically a person living with a mental illness usually has more than one illness. And as I mentioned, our son lived with 4. Usually there's regular use of alcohol or drugs. And in addition, there's usually regular use of tobacco. Lots of anger. And took me a lot of years to understand after Michael's death what this was all about. I always thought his anger was at me. It was unprovoked. It was crazy. And it would create a lot of emotional outbursts on my part, which shame on me. I don't have any good feelings about that. The other hand, Michael's anger was not at me. It was at his illness. Why can't I get better? I'm doing everything I'm supposed to, and I still feel like crap. Lots of shame. Can you imagine? Our son was ashamed of his illness. Can you imagine? I was ashamed of his illness. Now, what disease do you know of where somebody is ashamed they have it? It's crazy. questionable decision-making. We all make bad decisions, but I thought Luke also explained how our brains work. Again, if you have a mental illness, your brain isn't functioning properly, you make lots of bad decisions. And I want to just throw out, I now have a way to kind of understand a little what our son was going through. So in the northern climates, if any of you live in the northern climates, in our city, which is Minneapolis, when we recently had this happen, when we only get an inch or two of snow, they don't plow the roads, they pour the salt on, and the salt melts the snow and safe driving can occur. Well, there's one problem with that. It creates a mist, a spray on the road, smears up your windshield. And if you're driving along and you don't have adequate windshield washer fluid, the wipers just smear your windshield. And I say our son and people living with mental illness, they're looking through a dirty windshield. So what they see is not what you would see through a clear windshield. So that's partly why they make the decisions they do. And then use and stopping medication, we talked about that a little bit. It's just very common. And the other piece of this about meds, typically, and Luke could maybe speak to this, but this is our experience, a new med typically takes about 8 weeks to really see any change in the behavior or really do anything to address the issue. Well, if you're feeling like crap, 8 weeks is a long time. And then on top of that, because of the lack of psychiatrists, and now really with the COVID, but we had experiences where Michael really needed to see somebody. It could take 8 to 12 weeks just to get an appointment with a psychiatrist. What illness do you know of if you have a dramatic need that it would take that long to get the help you need? Next, last, I'd like to just say before we leave is about 20% of adults in the United States are living with a mental illness, and about 10% are living with substance use disorder. And because they're co-occurring, basically we can figure about 1 out of 4 adults in the United States are living and coping with a mental illness. So an important part, Luke mentioned this, and it's important, people live with recovery. So I want to stress how important it is if you get the right treatment that you can live a normal life. I want to mention just 2 celebrities, and there's many. I mean, Mike Tyson lived with mental illness. John Daly lived with mental illness, or lives. They both are alive. But a person that in the NFL season we see every Sunday that we just finished here recently, Terry Bradshaw. He's a Hall of Fame quarterback, has 4 Super Bowl rings. And he also happens to live with bipolar disorder. So he's living in recovery. Another person that lives with bipolar disorder is Jane Pauley. She's the anchor of CBS Sunday Morning every week, does an excellent job, has a great reputation. She lives with bipolar disorder. So I wanted to really stress with proper treatment, with living your therapy plan, you can be successful living in recovery. Next slide. But here's the problem. We talked about mental and physical. If my son was talking with you today, you could say, how you doing, Mike? He'd say, I'm doing fine. He wore a mask, not a mask because of COVID, but a mask covering his real feelings, what were going on inside. So often I hear this statement, especially unfortunately after somebody's died by suicide. Geez, he seemed like everything was going good for him. Didn't notice anything. So the question was asked earlier, what's that first thing to ask? And we're going to do a couple scenarios. Show compassion, show interest. open the door, get the conversation going. And then it's really, really important to just listen and not be the fixer. We tend to be the fixers in society, but this needs time and patience. So don't be distracted by the fact the person looks fine. Next slide. We have a crisis in this country, the United States. These are some of the statistics. In 2018, over 48,000 suicide deaths. It's the 10th leading cause of death. Among males 25 to 54, it's the second leading cause of death. That's the workforce in the construction industry, by and large. 78% of all suicide deaths are by males. The reason for that, the predominant use of death in a suicide by males is firearms. Suicide deaths are up 35% since 1999. And in 2018, there were over 1.4 million suicide attempts. So in Canada, far less numbers in population, but suicide's the 9th leading cause of death. And in 2018, there were nearly 4,200 suicides. So in both cases, we have a crisis. And I would submit one thing I want you to consider is terminology. It helps us look at these issues differently. So when we say, and how are we going to change things, the easiest is change our terminology. So earlier, I've mentioned many times our son lived with bipolar disorder. That's the first change I really submit you try to use. We don't say somebody is cancer, but we do say he's bipolar. See what that does when you say he is, that frames it, it's their fault, they could fix it if they wanted to, versus a person lives with an illness. They live with substance use disorder. It changes the whole perspective, removes the shame, and it allows we can talk about it. The second thing I would throw out, we commonly say he committed suicide. And it's my strong belief and the belief of many other people in the healthcare industry, when we say he committed suicide, we're blaming the person. We're saying they wanted to die. It was their fault. I can tell you without hesitation, my son did not want to die. He wanted his pain to end. So I use the terminology, and many do. Our son died by suicide or died from suicide. He did not want to die. And I would submit until we quit blaming the person and blaming their family for the death, we're not going to show much difference in these numbers. So I would throw you out, consider those two different terms, and then I think we can make a difference in these statistics. Next slide. So why our industry? Okay, our industry, we have more suicides than any other industry. Not something we want to be proud of. Our suicide rates, 45.3 per 100,000. And in the United States, it's 3 times the general population, the rate of suicide. In Canada, it's 4 times the rate of suicide as the general population. So why is this? So I would submit we can't ever fix a problem unless first we admit we have a problem, and then we have to say, what's the cause of the problem? So I'm going to throw out some general causes, and I would submit until we really change some of these without and still getting our industry to do the work we need to do, we're not going to make much progress. So the first one, old school tough guy culture. When I use tough guy, that's a generalization. It fits females or males. We have this culture that you got to tough it out, get the job done. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So let me explain a couple of them. One, I would throw out, using a sports analogy, every day in our industry is game day. There's no slough days. We got to meet a tough schedule. We got to get work done in tough environments sometimes. And it's got to be done safely and at high quality. So a lot of pressure. So anybody on the A team wants to stay on the A team. And how do you stay on the A team if you're not feeling well? How do you stay on the A team if you're having a bad day mentally or physically? You tough it out, because nobody wants to get kicked off the A team. And part of that, of course, both office and field, but particularly in the field, if you don't work, you don't get paid. So there's that financial pressure all the time. But more importantly, there's a culture we have in our industry. There's pride to say, I worked on that project, or I worked with the best crew of the company. And there's pride with staying with a good company. So that has a lot of impact. Second piece, we go where the work is. We travel. There's family separation. I was a guy that traveled a lot in my career. And I could tell you firsthand, it's not fun. But why did I travel? Well, there were incentives, oftentimes more hours, back to money. Hey, if you go on the road, we're going to work 612s, 610s. Wow, I can make a lot of money. I'm looking out for my family. But there's a trade-off to that. I'm away from home. I'm away from my support group. It's lonely. You come back to the hotel, and after so many hours of just flipping channels, there's the tendency, the invitation to, hey, let's go have a couple of beers. Let's do this. Let's do that. Because we're lonely. Sleep disruption. Again, we're a service industry. Not only do we go where the work is, we do the work when we need to get it done. As an owner of a company, I didn't dictate when the work was going to get done. Our customers did. We got a holiday shutdown. We got a tight schedule. We expect you to work crews 12 hours each, 7 days of this 1 week shutdown. Puts a lot of stress on everybody. It disrupts your sleep. It disrupts your diet. It creates a lot of residual problems at home. And another thing I heard for so many years, Bob, I don't let stuff at home follow me to work. We all know that's a bunch of BS. We're complete people. Whatever happens at work affects us at home, and whatever happens at home affects us at work. We can't deny it. We're a physical industry, chronic pain. Maybe for years, if you're a painter pulling a spray gun up for many years, you're going to get carpal tunnel syndrome, very possibly. If you're hanging wall covering, you're going to have some shoulder issues. If you're lugging drywall around, back and shoulder issues. It's just part of our job. Even using all the care and safety procedures. So maybe for a while it's over-the-counter drugs and self-medication. After a while, it's prescription drugs, and we all know where that can lead. A big one, and it troubled me as an owner, but it's part of our industry, but we're going to talk about ways to get around some of this. Seasonal layoffs. In our area, because of climate, typically construction of all trades, mid-November to mid-December, cutbacks of about 20 to 25%, just because it's too cold to do work outside productively. Then we have project layoffs. People work their butt off, did the job well, the project ends. So one of my challenges as an owner always was trying to get enough work to meet the needs of our company. Well, I don't think I ever did very well at that. We either had not enough work and therefore had to lay some people off, or we had too much. And then if the bench was clean, we had to work our best people long hours. The last piece of this is access to lethal means. By and large, people in our industry are outdoor people. A lot of them are hunters, and they have access to firearms. And as I mentioned, that's unfortunately one way that people die by suicide is use of a firearm. So last, I want to say, if we have anyone from the office that isn't in the field anymore, and I know some of you are, I spoke at a webinar in 2017. And that was to the Construction Financial Management Association. These were all office people. And we covered much of the same information. And we asked two questions Anonymously, we asked people to answer yes or no. We didn't know who answered, but we know the totals. So the first question we asked at the end of the session was, how many of you have or are living with a mental illness or have had suicidal thoughts? 15% of the attendees said yes. Then we asked, how many of you have a family member who lives with a mental illness or a family member who has had suicidal thoughts? 53% said yes. So what that really tells us, as you talk to, your apprentices, as you talk to fellow workers, a lot of people, not only might they be living with an illness or having suicidal thoughts, but they have family members. So it's a multidimensional issue. Next slide. So let's talk about some myths. And there's a lot of them, but I just list a few here. Those who talk about suicide won't do it. Totally false. If somebody's talking about it, they're already crying for help. They're thinking about it. They're developing a plan. They're already in a serious situation. So don't assume, well, they're made a statement like, I wish I was dead. I'm going to kill myself. That's like red flags all over it. Talking to somebody about suicide might put the idea in their head. Again, that's false. If somebody you're working with, you're concerned about their well-being and you're concerned that they might be thinking of suicide, you will not put the idea in their head when you bring it up. You will help a conversation start so that you can get to the root of the problem and get them some help. Suicide attempts are just a cry for attention? Absolutely not. It's a cry for help. They don't know what to do. They're crying for help. And then last, once a person has a suicidal plan, they cannot be stopped. Totally false. Everything we do in life has three basic parts: idea, or what's called ideation, plan, and action. So all of you got the idea about change the culture. You heard about this. So that's an idea. Then you may be inquired, when is it? How do I take it? That was developing the plan. And last, you signed up for it and you're here today. Everything we do fits that. So somebody that has suicidal thoughts, the next step is a plan and the last step is action. So there's been studies of people that have survived a suicide attempt. And of those studies, 50% of the people that have survived a suicide attempt, that whole process was an hour or less. So think of the urgency of this. If you have that feeling that I think somebody is in harm's way and thinking of ending their life, you can't say, well, tomorrow I'll deal with it or next week I'll deal with it. This has urgency. Next slide. So what are some clues? And there's lots of them. And I'm not going to say that you're going to see all of these, some of these, but I want to give you an idea what these clues are. So there's three types of clues. There's verbal, there's behavioral, and there's situational. Some verbal clues. I wish I were dead. I'm tired of life. I'm a burden to everyone. Soon you won't have to worry about me. These aren't meant to be jokes. It's a person losing hope. Think of a person saying, I wish I were dead. Think of the word burden. That's a huge issue. People do not want to be a burden to those around them. So these are some verbal clues. Next slide. All of these clues should be taken seriously. Behavioral, the withdrawing from family and friends. Moodiness, hopelessness, unexplained anger, big tip-off. The person that's always been, open and part of the crew, maybe joking around a little bit. Now they're just angry, moody. Nobody wants to be around them. So part of the problem is when these behaviors happen, we tend to withdraw from that person. Well, that only accentuates the problem. Somebody putting their personal affairs in order. There again, depends on age. So I'm 73, almost 74. I did something this week because a parent of my one son-in-law did not put his affairs in order and had a tragic death, and it left chaos for the family. So I thought, well, I don't want that to happen to my family. So I've put all my stuff together as far as where everything is, and I've written it in written form, and I'm going to give it to all my kids so that if something happened to my wife and I, they're not going to have this chaos. Well, that's my age, but if somebody's doing that at age 30, 35, 40, it's a little strange. It's a cue. It's a clue. Giving away prized possessions, acquiring a gun or stocking pills. So then the giving away prized possessions. And unfortunately, while I was president of the company, we had one employee die by suicide. In my 37 years with the company, I'm aware of a half a dozen employees that have died by suicide. And one is this giving away prized possessions. The one that happened on my watch, the employees, days after his death, said, well, thought I was kind of strange that he was giving his prized brushes and graining tools and that kind of thing to the apprentice on the job, saying he wouldn't need them anymore. Nobody at the time let that sink in. Of course, after his death, they were saying, well, we should have known. So those are the words I hope you never have to say. I should have known. Obviously, none of us can totally be prepared for these things, but if in doubt, take some action is all I can say. Next slide. Situational clues. These are really important. Person loses their job. My goodness, that's everything they've been working for. That's image, status, losing control, loss of a major relationship. Shame is written all over both of those two. Diagnosis of a terminal illness. What's written into that? Burden. I don't want to be a burden. Loss of a family member or friend by suicide. Arrest and loss of freedom. There's shame in that. There's losing control. So on the bottom of the slide, in 2015, the Centers for Disease Control studied all suicide deaths. 29%, that's a pretty substantial percentage, occurred within 2 weeks of a life-changing event. 29%. So I want you to think about, as people go through tough life situations, the impact of that. And then when we have COVID on top of it, it even accentuates things. Next slide. So I developed this kind of a step process. Excuse me for a minute. I look at this, think of a physical injury or a mental crisis. So first thing you want to do is assess the situation, and it's from A to Z. So I'm going to first use a physical injury. If you're on a job site or you're in the office and somebody comes to you and they're bleeding, what's the first thing you do? Okay, where are they bleeding? How serious is it? And what's the proper response? Well, if you look at their hand and they got a small cut, any bleeding any place else? No. Well, of course, that small cut, maybe a Band-Aid. And of course, then later after that, after you assess and dress the wound, then it's like, how did it happen? What do we have to do to remedy that it doesn't happen again? So that would be minor first aid. On the other hand, if the person comes in and they're missing 3 fingers, bleeding profusely, well, you're going to call an ambulance. You're going to call 911 and get this person the care that you need immediately. I would say in the whole realm of mental illnesses, suicide prevention, it's the same thing. So Mike and I are going to go through a couple scenarios, and these are more of the first aid type. This is what one of you had asked, how do you start the conversation? These will be a little guidance on how do you start that conversation. These are first aid situations. And as you go up the steps, what do you do? Well, first, with mental health issues, it's a one-on-one conversation. Think of the shame. You don't start it in a big group and say, I don't know what your problem is. We got to talk about it. And that superior type attitude. This is, I'm your friend. I'm concerned about you. It's one-on-one. Can we talk about it? The next, it's really important, and Luke said this, convey your compassion, your concern. This is a fellow human being you care about. You want things to be right. Next is listen without judgment. It is so easy to want to fix the problem, but at this point, you want to listen and remember the dirty windshield. I can remember listening to our son, and sometimes I would just want to shake my head and say, I don't know what the heck you're thinking. And sometimes I did because I didn't know better. So I really encourage you, listen without judgment. Someone might say, I'm having suicidal thoughts. I'm just a burden. I want to end my life. And the easy temptation would be, I don't know how you can say that. You're one of the best people we have on the crew. You're one of the best people in the company. You got so much to live for. That is not going to get you anywhere. That's not going to help the person. Next, stay with the person. If somebody else needs to be involved, get them involved, call them, get someone else to get their attention. Make sure, as this now is becoming more of a crisis. So this is a case where you really think the person's talking suicidal, they may take some really quick action. Check out the situation. Are there lethal means readily available? You want to make sure they're removed or you move from that area. The last steps, ask the person, I'm here for you. I want to help you. I'm not a health professional. I think we need more professional help here. Are you willing to get some more help? I will go with you. And at that point, you're maybe calling your EAP. You're maybe looking into other resources. Again, I really encourage you as we go through resources, keep them in your phone. When you're in a crisis situation, you're not going to remember where they are in your desk or where they even are by just memory. You'll be focused on one thing, helping this person. Last, now it's really a big crisis. It's that person that's lost 3 fingers. You got to get help. And if you do call 911, in the United States, you want to ask for a crisis intervention team. They're called CIT teams. These people are trained in these kind of situations. The law enforcement people, I've helped teach some of those classes. In many states, they're required to take 40 hours of training in mental health and dealing with mental health crisis. So we can avoid that law enforcement showing up with guns drawn, and then it leads to a real bad situation. I will mention the numbers now, but they're on the last slide. In the US, it's 800-273-8255. That's the National Suicide Helpline. It's 24/7, people trained in dealing with crisis situations. Or if you text, it's home 741-741. Next slide. You can make a difference. So think about some of what we've covered, and it's really, we're digesting a whole day into an hour or so. I want to give a story, true story. So about 6 months after I retired, the company that I had retired from asked me to come and speak at their all company meeting, and which I did, their safety day. I covered much of the same information. About 6 months after that, one of the supervisors in the company got a text early in the morning from a very good employee. And the text said, I can't do it anymore. Now, maybe it would have been easy for that person to say, I got a busy day going today. I'll try to get a hold of that person later on today. Or it might have been easy to say, I don't know what the heck that person's problem is. Apparently it's not showing up to work today. I'm gonna have to get another person there, and it's really screwing things up. What that person did do, though, said there's something wrong here. He took that as a clue. Something's really wrong. He got his supervisor involved. They reached out to get a hold of that person. It took a while because he wasn't answering his phone, but once they got through to him, what did they say? What was the conversation? We're concerned about you. You're really important. We're here for you. Can we come and talk? Where are you? The person allowed them to come and talk. When they arrived, he was alone by himself in his car in a parking lot with no other cars around him. He had the idea, he had the plan, and he had the means. Thankfully, they saved a life. Thankfully, they got him the help he needed. And thankfully, he's still a valuable employee. So it has urgency. If your gut's telling you, I think something's really wrong here, you've got to act on it. And worst case, or not worst case, but so you upset the person. They know you care. But in this case, the person was almost ready to end their life, and a life was saved. Next slide. So at this point, Mike and I are going to do a little dialoguing. I'm going to be the foreman. These are just some examples on the IMS or the LMS. There's 7 of these. And these were just some we thought they happen. And you can probably have them that are specific to your situation. What we do when you come to Hanover, we spend all afternoon of the second day role playing. And what we find is when you put yourself in the real situation, it's not generic. It's not just talking about it. It's now I got to walk the walk. What do I say? How do I handle this? So this is why we think these scenarios are important. So you are the foreman on a job site. You've noticed over the last few weeks that a seasoned journey person that you know well has withdrawn and is not as energetic as he normally would be. You have that something is not right feeling. This week, he is called in sick on Monday and Tuesday. How would you approach the situation when he hopefully returns to work on Wednesday? So Mike, are you now hooked up?
I'm right here, Bob.
Okay, so I use in my presentations old Bob, new Bob, because I've changed and I've had to work at it. Old Bob would have been, here's would have been old Bob. And I certainly don't suggest this, but I think we've probably all done this. So I'm the foreman and Mike shows up and could go a couple ways. Show up and there's other people around in the room, the crew's gathering. I can say, well, Mike, look who we have here. The guy who let the whole crew down on Monday, Tuesday, and he finally decides to show up. Hey, Mike, how you doing? Talk about a little shame there and a little lack of compassion, really making Mike even feeling really bad. Or another way to go, old Bob, pull Mike aside and say, and you get a little emotion there. Mike, what the hell is going on with you? I needed you Monday and Tuesday. You screwed up the whole darn job. Now we're behind schedule. You better get your crap together. Again, what good does that do? Maybe it made me feel good to vent my feelings. So here's where we would suggest is a better way to go about it. I'd get the crew started. And as guys were kind of getting going and leaving the shop, say, hey, Mike, you got a minute?
Yeah, Bob, I got a minute.
Okay. I'm really glad you're back today. You're really valuable for our team. And, you know, we missed you. Are you okay? I hear you were sick Wednesday, Tuesday. Is, you know, can I help anyway? Anything we can talk about? Do I have to be concerned today what kind of work I put you on? Because maybe you're still got the, you know, achy back or something going on. So fill me in. What's going on?
Well, Bob, I just haven't been quite feeling myself lately. And I just really couldn't face a few things that was going on. And frankly, Bob, I just bailed. I just couldn't deal with things. And I just felt like I just needed to have a couple days off. And now I'm back, and I'm sorry, Bob. I don't know. I understand if you would be disappointed in the consequences that might mean for me, but I'm sorry. I just, like I said, I couldn't do it. And I don't know why, Bob. And it's not really something I even really want to talk about, frankly.
Well, I'm here if you want to talk about it, Mike. So let me just throw a couple things from my experience. If we have aches and pains, we go to the doctor, right? And get maybe, I've been dealing, as you know, with kind of a bad back. And, I've been getting some physical therapy and it's helping. On the other hand, if we have something dragging us down mentally, it's, we have resources for that. And, our union plan is excellent, Mike. And I've got here in my wallet the phone number for the EAP program, and the boss doesn't have to know anything about it. You can trust me. I'm not going to say anything about it. A mental health day is okay too, but if you were gone a couple days and you don't get some help for it, who's to say it won't keep going? And then that puts me in a bind, because if you're not here on an ongoing basis or I can't count on you, the boss is going to say, what the hell's with Mike? And I've got to tell him, hey, you're not showing up. And that's all I'm going to say. And then you might put your job in jeopardy. So it's okay to ask for help, and maybe you need a mental health day or to sort things out a little bit. And I'm okay with that. And I want you just to be okay.
Gosh, Bob, thanks. I didn't really expect this. I didn't know what to expect. But, you bring up some really good points, and I think I need to take you up on that. I need to go talk to somebody that can help me sort some things out. Well,
how about I'll give you this number, and before you go up in the tower and start working, why don't you go we got the phone in the back area, nobody else is here. Why don't you call the AP number and let me know how things are going. I want you to get some help and help you sort things out.
Thanks, Bob. I really appreciate your friendship and what that
means.
I'll do it, and I'll make a move and get that appointment just as soon as they can possibly see me.
And Mike, if you need to cut out early today or you need to leave, I'm okay with that. At least you and I know what the situation is. So, sometimes they got limited office hours. So if you got to cut out early today, just let me know and go take care of business.
Thank you, Bob. I'll do it.
Good. Then let's keep in touch, okay?
Yes, sir.
Do we want to talk about that a little bit or wait, Mike, until we finish the presentation?
I think now would be a good time to talk about this one, just real quick.
So
Okay.
I got a question. My name is Dave. I'm with DC 30. The way you had the situation worded, you're gambling on the fact that you hope he shows up for work on Wednesday. Why wait to have that conversation on Wednesday? If you think this is as bad as it gets, why not try and reach out? I mean, if you're the foreman, maybe you know where he lives, maybe you can get to him Tuesday instead of gambling that he's even still around on Wednesday. I mean, that's everything we've been talking about. It's a gamble to say, again, in layman's terms, why put off today what you can do tomorrow? Get it done now.
It's a valid point, Dave.
And question to that point is, do you brief that crew of what you feel is his situation, so that he doesn't come back and these guys are all over him? Do you just say, hey, back off, leave it alone, I've got it under control, without relinquishing any of his personal information? Just say, hey, I've got it. Just back off of him, leave him alone, and I'll deal with this.
Yeah, I think you really want to be careful what you divulge. It might just mean, and we can all relate to it. Mike's taking care of some stuff. He's working out. We've all had shit happen in our lives, excuse the language, but give him a little slack. And he and I are working on it. Because see, here's the bizarre thing. With physical injuries, we give people a lot of slack. I know how the industry works. Somebody comes back from a work comp injury. We don't throw them at the full bore right away, hauling pails of mud or doing heavy lifting. If they're coming back from a shoulder injury or a back injury, we give them slack, right, for a while. But we don't do that if somebody comes back from 30 days of inpatient. Right away, we throw them right in the deep water. And somebody of authority on that job should know Mike's coming back from 30 days of inpatient with Luke. And if he needs a mental health afternoon, let's just work with him here. And all the crews I've ever known, if they know a little bit about the situation, they're there to help each other. And I would say most employers are the same.
Yeah, the other thing about what you brought up, Dave, is Mike had called into work and said that he was sick. So when he comes back in, I don't know if that would trigger a call from the foreman, although you do recognize that something hasn't been quite right. And like Luke mentioned, and Bob both, when we see something like that, we need to react to it. We need to trust our intuition. So you bring up a really good point. And if you know that person well enough, you should be able to make that call. Whether it's when he first calls in or the next day when he calls back again, and have that conversation. What's really going on here?
Luke, any input on that question that Dave had?
Yeah, I think it was well said. It's the people we tend to know most are the people we live with and the people we work with. So if your gut's telling you something's not right and you feel so obliged to be more proactive, by all means. The other thing that I would say is, and I have these conversations all the time with people that live in my facility, whether it's the mental health aspect or the substance use, but regardless, for being gone for a month, well, what do I say? What do I do? What do I say? And the conversation is different from every person. And I usually ask, what are you comfortable saying? And it's anything from, hey, I needed to take care of my personal health, to please respect my privacy, to, hey, I'm an addict and alcoholic, or I'm suffering from depression and I needed to work on myself. It's somewhere in between, hey, I just needed to work on myself, sometimes it depends from person in person or coworker to boss, and it changes for that aspect too. But yeah, I think you guys make all the appropriate points. And having a boss or a friend at work or a coworker that, and I often ask as me being a boss. So I have worked with people that have significant health, depression, anxiety, or bipolar, or I've worked with people that have relapsed in this field. And I ask them, what are you comfortable? What would you like me to tell the people you work with? What are you comfortable with? So that's always a good judge too.
We ready to move on the next slide?
Yeah.
So the whole thing we're talking about, creating a new culture. Wellness is a priority. It's okay to ask for help. Culture of openness and support. End the silence. Quit being where we have to tough it out. Yeah, we know we got a job to do, but we gotta, the longer we put off what's eating at us, whether it's our internal problems, physical problems, whatever. And I can tell you with my foot and my toe that got infected, it didn't get better by putting it off. It only got worse. And then it was harder to fix it. Training regarding soft skills. We're really great as an industry with technical skills. We shine at that, but we're not very good at soft skills. So when I look back at my career in running jobs and running the company, very few people were terminated because they didn't know how to do the job. The bulk of anybody that was terminated was the soft skills, not showing up for work. They were struggling with issues that they weren't dealing with and we didn't know. And I feel bad about that. I can think of many employees that left the company not on their will, but it was, we weren't really doing well at figuring out what was going on. And we didn't give them an opportunity because it was that whole focus of, we got a job to do. If you can't show up to work, if you can't get your act together, I'll find somebody else. And unions have been part of that also. I would submit most union halls know the person on the bench that they kind of cringe when they send them out because they've got issues. They don't show up to work. They're not productive. We got to work on this. It's a we issue, labor and management. Seeking resources to support, as I did with Mike in that one scenario. The union industry has very good health care, and part of that health care is mental health care. We have resources, but make sure they're in your phone, you have access, they're accessible. And then physical and mental wellness are treated the same. So here's another one I've always, in retrospect, looked at. So even though we're a productive industry, in the upper Midwest, a huge thing is deer hunting. So we got projects to get done, but it's amazing how people could say, hey, can I have a couple days off for deer hunting? The answer was always yes. But on the other hand, I would submit we're not ready as an industry if somebody comes in and says, I need a couple days off for my mental health. How would that fly in most companies? How would that fly on most job sites? Not very well. We got to get better at that because maybe in both cases, that's what that person needs. So when they return, their head's back in the game. So what's the real end? This is really a safety and health issue. So if people aren't in their A game frame of mind, it will affect their productivity, it will affect their quality of work, it affects their safety. So it's an industry, we all win if we open up to deal with this. The last thing, what I would hear in my company or our company, it's going to cost too much money. We can't let the crew run when they want to work and where they want to work because it's all chaos. Well, what's the flip side? So I'm going to use an example. Again, old Bob. We sent a foreman, a very good foreman, out of town. It was a job in southern Louisiana, long ways from Minneapolis. I didn't ask him, what impact might this have on your life? What impact might this have on your family? I was posturing as, think of the money you can make. We were paying the individual over scale to run the job, 610s, a lot of hours. We'd fly him home once a month, gave him a pickup truck, company truck, gas, credit card, the whole 9 yards. How could he say no? So he didn't say no. But what I didn't know, this person was had a substance use alcohol issue. And guess what? When that person was away from home, working long hours, not eating properly, it only got worse to the point he disappeared. For 1 week, we didn't know where he was. Guess what disruption that did with the job and the customer? It was chaos. So all I would have had to have done, and I did this later on an out-of-town project, I said to the foreman, here's what I got planned, but I want this to be win-win. I want you to be open and honest with me, and I'm going to tell you flat out, you can say no to this opportunity. It won't disrupt your position with the company. If it's going to disrupt your home life, it's going to disrupt what things you're dealing with, I don't want you to go. So you give that a couple days and think about it and let me know what works. That individual came back and said, I can't do it right now. I'm not able to go out of town. A year later, he was beaming and he came in, I've got stuff figured out. If you ever need me again to go out of town, I'm available. Win-win. And what did that cost? It saved money as an employer. So I get a lot of pushback sometimes. All this is going to cost too much money. It's better for everybody. So next slide. Second scenario, Mike and I are co-workers. I don't have any authority over him. We're just two guys working on the job. Mike comes back after lunch, obviously under the influence. How do you approach this person with your concern? If the conversation turns negative, what next? So I'm a guy that's been in the industry 45 years. For some of you younger, in the 60s and 70s, open drinking on construction sites was common. Not hidden, it was open. So today's world, of course, that's not the case, thankfully. So Mike comes walking in. We're both working on this job after lunch. Hey, Mike, it looks to me like maybe you had a couple beers over lunch. Are you okay? Mike there?
You're muted, Mike.
You're still, there you go.
Boy, and it was good too. Bob, don't go there with me on this right now. I'm just gonna go back to work. I'm on the other side of the building. You know, you go do your thing and I'll go do mine.
Well, I just got to tell you as a friend, Mike, you know, we deal with equipment that can possibly cause injury. So I want you to have all your PPE on and don't work off the ground. I mean, we don't need you falling. I worry about you. So are you, you know, we've all had a couple beers. Are you really, you know, tipsy, or are you just feeling a little, or what's going on?
I think I'm fine, Bob. I think I'll be okay.
Is this?
Appreciate your concern, but I think I'll be okay.
So why did you need to go have a couple beers at lunch? You know, hey, we could do that after work.
Yeah, I know, but I don't know. I just decided to do it. I probably shouldn't have, but I did.
So how about if we work together this afternoon? I just don't want something to happen to you. And you put me in a bad spot. I'd be honest with you, I don't quite know what to do, because we all know they got a zero tolerance on this job site. And if somebody comes by and realizes what situation you're in, you're going to lose your job. Do you think you should go home and just tell the foreman, hey, you're really feeling kind of crappy? I think you should get off the job and just go home. Go home and sleep it off and call it a day.
Go back over to the other side of the building where I'm working. But if you want to work with me, I'll work with you, Bob, today. And
Well,
I'm feeling okay. I only had a beer and a half. I left the other half for after work.
yeah, well, I can smell it on you. So I know you had, you know, we've all done that routine too. I've only had a beer. Well, the first one goes down so good, the second and third one really even tastes better, you know? So I'm just really, this is a quandary of what to do. You know, ideally, I'd like to see you go home, but if that isn't going to work, I'll work with you so something doesn't happen. But let's do this. If I think you're not able to do the job, I'm going to make sure you go home. In fact, I'll take you home.
Okay, Bob, whatever it takes, whatever it takes.
Okay. So this one was a kind of a quandary for both of us, because I think we've all been in that situation where somebody isn't totally, or maybe even shows up to work in the morning and they're not totally with it. So we throw this out. How do you handle that as a coworker? Any input?
I have some, Bob. Bernie Cook, DC 711. How are you?
Good.
And I want to, can I go back to the other scenario as well? Because
Absolutely.
I kind of agreed with Dave with DC 30 about, kind of informing the crew. But in a way, how about use of stewards? I haven't heard any mention of a steward and, having someone as a right-hand man, because sometimes we need some backup. And like this scenario here, the coworker handled it, I thought, pretty well. But I think there should be follow-up to maybe, inform the steward on a job, if there is one, of possible, scenario that just happened. So you have some backup. Any thoughts on that, or?
I can see some validity of that. In my area, stewards are typically only on the big jobs, rather all the other majority of little jobs, but it's got,
Right.
I suppose it depends a little bit how well Mike knows the steward or the steward knows Mike. You got a whole other potential issues there too.
Yeah.
And is
It-
Mike comfortable with the steward,
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah,
lot
that
of.
was, yeah, that's why I'm asking, because, even if you go up to a person by yourself, and if it goes bad and you don't have backup, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I worry about situations like that. Because I've actually been in a couple. So I just thought I'd put it out there.
Yeah, thank you.
Which brings up the question, do you even approach the person, or
Yeah,
who actually could be a very close friend, a very close coworker to you?
sure.
It puts you in a very difficult situation,
Mhm.
both ways.
Sure. And the way you guys presented it, that went pretty well. I mean, it could have went real bad, so. But thank you. I appreciate it.
I got something, Mike. I got something, Mike.
Go ahead.
So, with the changing the construction culture, part of the conversation centers around peer advocates. And, maybe there's a peer advocate there that could handle that independent of the steward and the foreman. Receive training specifically for situations like that. I know locally that, it happened to be the foreman who was a mess. And one of the apprentices got a hold of somebody at our office, and that person was paid a visit. And it worked out. I mean, I know it's not always going to work out, but you can't just say, well, I only want to deal with 100% success. You got to take the lumps when the lumps come.
Good point, Mike.
Luke, any thoughts?
Couple. and he brought up changing the culture, right? And I'm reading it, it says, obviously under the influence. And I don't know, sometimes is the culture, there's obviously a lot of people under the influence, which makes it challenging, right? So, but yeah, that's part of changing the culture. And me, I get to rely on my convictions of what's right and what's wrong. And if someone's under the influence, I don't want them hurting me or them. And I can comfortably, I can always go back to that. Hey, I care about you and I care about me. So no matter if someone's in active use, remember they can, I always say one part of the brain sells bullshit, the other part buys bullshit, right? So if it's a tough conversation and if that person is denying or reflecting or angry back, well, wait a minute, I'm doing the right thing for me and him, whether that person sees it or not. You know, and I can go back to that, and that's part of changing the culture, I think. It's, I care about you and I care about everyone else that is working on this site. So might not see it that time, but it's gonna question if he's gonna continue to be under influence the way he is if we address him out of care and concern and the conviction of it affects me and him. So that's one perspective I have on it.
Okay. We'll have more time for questions. I go one last slide, then I'm done with my presentation, then I'll turn it back to Mike.
I'll say one more thing, Bob.
Excuse me. Yeah.
It's to give it more kind of umph. I'd rather step on your toes than step on your grave. Right. So, and that takes it to an extreme, but it says, wait a minute, how can I speak from the heart and speak from care and concern, even though I know that person might not take it that way? I know that's where it's coming from, and I can sleep well at night. So.
Didn't mean to cut you off. So here's some resources. First and foremost, IUPAT Helping Hand, fantastic resources. Some other ones you may want to consider: American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. You go on this website, they got a lot of resources. Also, they have state organizations and in some cases local chapters where not only do they have information, they have support groups. They also have where they might have a speaker be able to come out and speak to your union or your students in your apprenticeship program. National Institute on Mental Health, that's a governmental agency. For many of my blogs, I go there as a resource just to get some of the facts and figures, and excellent resource. National Alliance on Mental Illness, I work with this group pretty closely. A lot of my speaking I do with them, and speaking to community groups, church groups, business groups, etc. They have a lot of information, but they also have state organizations, local organizations, and in many cases have speakers available to go out and speak to groups, and also support groups. So people living with these illnesses may find a support group. And again, many of these are no cost. There's no fees. Suicide Prevention Resource Center is more inclined towards industry. And what I should have put on here and I didn't is Save Suicide Awareness Voices of Education. And it's just www.save.org. They have, again, excellent information and support groups. I was in one of their male-only support groups for probably 3 years after Michael died, and I found great support, and that helped me get to where I am today. Crisis lines, the US I mentioned earlier, the Canadian crisis line is there, 833-456-4566, or text home 686-868, and Quebec has their own suicide crisis line, and they're staffed by trained people, trained professionals. In the I don't know about all the states, but at least I can speak to Minnesota. If Minnesota, you go to the US crisis line, it will hook you up automatically with your county crisis center. So it's gets more to the local situation. But those are resources that I keep in my phone just in case a situation arises. Mike, it's off to you.
All right, thank you, Bob. I'll get my screen up. I'm thinking you can see it. Is that the case?
Yes, you can see it.
Yep.
Great. Well, gosh, Bob and Luke both. Great information this afternoon that we're going through. And again, how important all of this is in all our councils throughout the IUPAT. It's just so nice. We're feeding one another and through changing the culture of construction and the Helping Hand Initiative, we've got great things that we continue to do in all our district councils and building our helping hand teams and providing the information to the members and the employers. And I'm going to reiterate just a few things from Bob leading up to a very staggering screen that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But recent studies, as Bob pointed out, from the CDC and the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention reported that construction industry in both the US and Canada suffers the highest suicide rate compared to all other industries. Bob mentioned over 48,000 Americans have died, an average of 132 suicides a day. There are over 4,000 deaths by suicide each year, with an average of 10 people per day in Canada. And suicide is 3 times higher among men compared to women. Third of the deaths by suicide are among people from 45 to 59. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among youth from 15 to 34 years old. For every suicide, there are 25 attempts. And as Bob mentioned, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the US and the 9th leading cause in Canada. The rate of suicide is highest in the middle-aged white men in particular. So as we've discussed this afternoon, we all know, and it's widely accepted, that construction work is the most physically challenging and stressful work in all employment industries. It's difficult and taxing work. It doesn't matter what craft or trade you're talking about. Construction work is hard on the body. No one disputes that fact. Workers are looking for relief from the pain and the grind of daily and weekly and monthly and yearly. Of course, it can start out as just a slight irritation and then a trip to your doctor just to get some relief, and then the cycle begins. And for some people, as we've heard, it can cycle and spiral out of control. Doctors are prescribing 3 times more opioids than they did in 1999. Any of us who have had a serious injury and have experienced a trip to the pharmacist to pick up our prescription for a narcotic or an opioid to relieve the pain understands that. It's obvious where this can lead. The beginning of a worker caught up in the cycle who finds themselves suddenly addicted, facing self-incrimination, guilt, and the stigma. It can become a difficult hole to dig out of, and many face it alone without the hope of anyone, to recognize their situation and just come alongside with an outstretched helping hand. If a construction worker can't get paid or can't be on the job, he doesn't get paid for that. But the basic fact has greatly contributed to the rise and the use of opioids and other prescription drugs to treat pain, so that men and women in the trades can get in another day of work despite their injuries. Unfortunately, it's led to some tragic numbers in the construction industry when it comes to substance use disorder, drug abuse, addiction, and the loss of life. Opioids account for 20% of total spending on prescription drugs in the construction industry. That's 5 to 10% greater than any other industry. An estimated 11.6% of full-time construction workers, that's 1.1 million people, have used illicit drugs within the last month. An average of 115 Americans die every day from opioid overdose, and more than 10,300 Canadians lost their lives to opioid in less than 3 years, from January 2016 to September of 2018. So I'm just going to pause for a second and just let you take that in. When a coworker, a friend, a family member, or an acquaintance dies by suicide, it just creates a ripple effect that jolts us to our foundation. And we've heard that from Bob today about the loss of a loved one and how that affects our lives. So in past sessions, I've only had the statistic from 2018 of 11 members dying. But in updating my presentation, I contacted the GST's office and I received some information on the deaths of IUPAT members. And as you can see, they're pretty stark realities to what we're facing right now in the IUPAT. So consider this. There were 1,103 IUPAT member deaths in 2020. Of those deaths, only 417 of those were recorded with a cause of death. 16 or 3.9% were recorded as a suicide, and 18 or 4.32 were recorded as overdose deaths. But that leaves us with 618 deaths where the cause of the death is unrecorded. The numbers tell us the facts that we can't deny. With 618 deaths unrecorded, we could at least double our totals from 13 to 26 suicide deaths and from 22 to 44 overdose deaths. That's 70 members. And this is why we've got to continue to support our members and employees in building the Helping Hand Initiative in every district council. The facts just don't lie. So many of you know how this process all began, and I'm just going to review it quickly for those that are here for the first time. In 2017, the IUPAT took action at the FIF. We acknowledged the opioid crisis and suicide in the construction industry, and we hosted a work group forum. Over 130 members and management attended that forum. There was frank dialogue. We talked about substance use disorder and suicide affecting our district councils and our IUP employers. And then we broke into work groups and we prioritized some actions we felt that needed to take place. What came out of that prioritization was survey, media, and curriculum. And so we convened a labor management task force, and we developed an action plan, and we presented that action plan to the General Executive Board. And that plan was approved and we moved forward. So we acted on 3 primary goals. We wanted to launch the IUPAT Helping Hand website for all members, their families, employers, friends of the IUPAT, so that they can get access and find the resources for treatment. Then we needed to create the curriculum to erase the stigma of seeking help. Then we needed to launch that curriculum through the Training the Trainer course and provide online access. And we accomplished all 3 of those goals. So survey, the LMCI conducted a survey of nearly 3,000 contractors and IUPAT members on their awareness of union and employer programs to help them with substance use disorder and mental health issues. Unfortunately, a third of the contractors surveyed and over half the members didn't know that there were help for these challenges through employee assistance programs or the health and welfare benefits affiliated with their district councils. The surveys really confirmed that we had lots of work we needed to do to provide the resources to members and employers. On the PowerPoint, you'll see the lack of awareness to the employee assistance programs through the district councils. Only 44% of members are aware of programs available for mental health, suicide, and substance use disorder. More important is that 61% of those members would utilize the services available through an EAP. So the next was media. And in 2018, the IUPAThelpinghand.com was launched. That provides online resources and provides background on why suicide and substance use disorder are hitting the construction industry so hard. It lists warning signs to look out for in a coworker or loved one who may be suffering through a mental health situation. You'll find the national call service numbers, Canadian call service numbers for both substance use disorder and suicide. And then there's resource materials and toolbox talks to download on the webpage. We are distributing those in locations in the district council, the union halls, the training centers, the council offices, employer warehouses, and any location where a member would be able to see that information. Did I go too far there? So we determined that we'd go one step further, and a IUPAT Helping Hand toolkit was developed and sent out to all the district councils. In the toolkits are 2 copies each of suicide and opioid posters, 100 copies of suicide handouts based on that design from the poster, 100 copies of substance use disorder handouts, 200 opioid toolbox talks, 200 wallet cards that recognizing the warning signs of suicide, and 200 wallet cards of 11 questions you can ask your doctor about opioids. And then also in that toolbox kit are the 10 steps of implementation that I'll show you here shortly. The Helping Hand videos have been produced and distributed for awareness in local meetings, delegate meetings, and apprenticeship training. And they're uploaded at the Finishing First LMC YouTube site also. Not only is it important that awareness resources reach the members through the IUPAT training and council locations, but we're also asking our employers to come alongside and support IUPAT Helping Hand. Employers can be the first to recognize that a member may be struggling with a problem of some kind. The signs aren't hidden. There's absenteeism, decrease in productivity, social distancing, and as we've talked about, the physical signs of substance use are just some of those indications that a member is struggling and is in need of support. The employer is an extremely important component in recognizing and supporting the member with substance use and mental health issues. Members spend a majority of their time under the eyes of the employer's leadership staff. In many cases, this is where the first indication of a problem can be exposed. This is when the member can receive intervention and the services and resources necessary to receive that help that they have to have. And we can assist with the district council's champion to come along and help them in that critical situation. When the district council champion, and just to let you know, the district council champion is a trusted individual with compassion, empathy, and a servant's heart, and a willing passion to give their time to fellow members. As the district council develops their Helping Hand Task Force, we recommend this to be a point of discussion. But first, the task force needs to take steps to build the council foundation through that labor management collaboration. And we'll talk more about that in our next steps.
Hey, Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know we are right at 4:30 right now. So just to be respectful, if any of our class participants, obviously we're running a little bit later, but if you guys can hang on with us, or if you need to drop off, just drop me a note in the chat and we can take it from there.
Couple more slides and I'm complete. So then we determined that changing the culture of construction and that curriculum needed to be developed, and which we're discussing today. It was adapted from other proven programs and implemented during the year 2018. And as we stated, we've had train the trainers in Hanover, and this is our 4th webinar. So here's some of our next steps. Continuing the implementation of changing the culture of construction in our district council is obviously the success of building the Helping Hand Initiative. Utilization also of the LMS, where you'll find that online right now. You can get that. You can direct members, apprentices to the Changing the Culture of Construction training in the LMS. Development of the council Helping Hand task force team to build and design that district council program, led by the BMST and supported by an employer co-chair. Awareness. It's at every Changing the Culture of Construction training session, I've asked how many are familiar with the IUPAT Helping Hand Initiative. And I know that those numbers are growing now, but in the past, sadly, it's been not many. So we're in constant awareness mode in developing our Helping Hand Initiative in our district councils throughout all the IUPAT. We also have a labor management task force team in each region made up of leaders that our champions work with, and you can contact at any time. But all this can't happen without all of our support. Your participation in the webinar today is the first step in moving the IUPAT Helping Hand and these resources forward to your members and councils. Here's one of the posters from, as many of you have seen, I hope all of you have seen this, posted in your offices and training centers. We've mentioned stigma several times today, and I'd like to leave you with this. Stigma is the mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. So it's not a disgrace to be overwhelmed by life circumstances to the point that you find yourself in a crisis. And no one should be treated as if it is. We're talking about valuable and loved people that need to be raised up above those attached negative labels so that they feel comfortable and safe coming forward to receive the medical and mental health support needed to be the person that they desire to be. Not the labels attached that bring condemnation. Yeah, it can be difficult, and it is difficult as a coworker and an employer, but we're embarking on a cultural change that is making it easier for those in substance use and mental health issues to come forward and to accept and receive the help that they need and they desire, removing the stigma, taking away that disgrace. It's our compassion and care that will lead them forward. When they're ready to come forward, trust will have been built, making it easier for them to take that leap of faith. That, in essence, is the IUPAT Helping Hand. And our hope is that through the Changing the Culture of Construction training and the IUPAT Helping Hand resources, that you'd be inspired to move this valuable life-saving educational support to all members of your council, adding mental health as an important component to the services that IUPAT councils provide to their members now, and also to the employers and their families. So with that, I know most of you have seen this, the 10 steps of implementation. Our district councils are in process of completing these 10 steps right now. We've been on it for probably about 4 or 5 months, I would say. And I would say that we're up in the 70 percentile of completing these steps. And this is what the build of the Helping Hand Initiative is walking through these 10 steps, building those teams in your district councils, and moving that support forward. So with that, we'll open it up for some quick questions. If anybody has any questions, Bob, Luke, and I are here to answer any questions that you have.
I got a question, Mike, and for you and the team. So taking, I forget, Core 158, changing the culture of construction was a prerequisite of this course, the train the trainer side of it. And I agree that it had a lot of, really detailed information, quite frankly, probably three out of 3.5 hours, or maybe 3 out of 4 hours that were all directly related to like the drugs themselves. And not so much the changing the culture portion of it. Are we looking to develop something that's more applicable specifically for the members that, minus the details on the drugs, but that's just more specific to what we are talking about today? The soft skills provided or necessary, the advocate type work. Because I have a hard time thinking that the course that we took as a prerequisite is something that I feel is applicable to all of our members that's going to help change that culture. And I don't know if it's just me, that's why I wanted to ask that one first while everybody's still here. I got plenty of time. I got questions for you. But I figured this one is more of a broader scope. I'd ask first.
And I don't know if Tom is still on the call.
Yes, Tom is here.
Is that something you want to address, Tom?
I could, sure, Steve. And yes, that I think is semi alluded to, Mike or somebody mentioned, there's a bigger picture to this program, the peer advocacy piece, right? That is, we're just kind of waiting for it, which is ready. It's kind of turnkey, right? It's already been developed. So I think some folks that are on the, I see in the class might have been part of that piece. And I know Mike's been kind of championing that piece as well. And I think we're just waiting, for some direction from not as, higher ups than myself and Mike probably in our chair. But we do agree with you, because that's definitely been the next step. I think every time I speak, to the folks that have been teaching here is looking to what's the next step, and that is the next logical step. So it's available, it's not available, but it's available if we want to, if the folks that have the say to go ahead and do it, because I think that's that true value of the value that you're going to get from that, changing the culture on the construction site. This was when we Mike, you can speak to it probably more than I can, but I know I was part of this work group. There was a lot of different things that were byproducts. This one was the training, and that was the one that I was heavily involved in. I know there's a toolkit of some sort, right, Mike? If there's something, is there something along that line as well? So there's some other resources that are available that I think Mike probably mentioned already. But I think the more we hear from you folks, or you can direct those things towards Mike. Mike can take those to the folks that would be able to make and pull the trigger on the next steps, because the next steps are really the ones where that culture will change. But I know I see some folks from District Council 35. I know they've done a lot, right? As far as the groups, and I know I follow stuff with District Council 21 and some of the stuff they have going on as well. So I think if any of those folks want to share with some of the things they're doing at their locals, right? Because I know that's pretty powerful stuff that they have going on. I don't know if anybody wants to share that, but beyond that.
I will. I'll share. You want me to share?
Thanks. That's what you can't see me looking at you, but I'm looking at you.
That's all right. How you doing, everyone? My name's Chris Brennan. I'm with DC 35, business rep. 14 years sober, and with my partners on the line right now, Mike Mareshi and Jim McCann. We were one of the originals and with this group way back when. We had kind of crafted something here, but just to keep it specific to your question, Steve, you know, we found that, you know, the three of us, me and Mike and Jimmy are in recovery. So we're fortunate with that. It's something very near and dear and passionate to us. We kind of got lucky that way. But we found that the whole education piece is important to training the trainer. You know, as a trainer, you have to have, you know, or you should have, you know, a whole thing, the whole idea of it. And then, but as we've gone through it, we've actually changed it up. You know, when we initially did it in the fall of 19 was our first time we gave it out to the apprentices. We actually have a 6-hour course with them that you know, that's mandated through the apprenticeship with them. Similar to what we've all sat through. I'm assuming everyone here has sat through the course, Mike, is that correct?
No, not everyone has.
But most have. So similar to I think it was a 2-day course that we all took. We molded it down, we got it down to 6 hours. We did put a lot of the drugs in initially. But then, you know, we've over the course of the last 2 years, we've chipped away at that, and we've really got into we give a little bits of our story, which is something maybe some of you might not have. We try to get really personal about it. Then we get into, there's also a big piece where we get into the EAP and what's available to them, who they can talk to. We have several peer advocates that we've had trained through Allied Trades Assistance Program, which we jumped on with as well. I don't know where this group is now with that, but we have in the field people we call peer advocates, and we have a little card made up where people can talk if they, you know, people that come to our recovery group on Wednesday nights, which we have another thing of, and it just really helps with talking to the folks. So we don't get into too much of the drugs, or we do get into it a little bit, I guess is what I'm saying, but we've really molded it down on how to talk to it. And we're constantly saying, this is an awareness, you know, during the course of the class, this is an awareness. This isn't, we're not like, even a peer advocate, we're not telling him to go out there and diagnose people. No, neither are we. But when you have that individual on the site or in the classroom, and it happens a lot, and Jimmy and Mike can attest to this, when we talk about it, inevitably, you know, 1, 2, sometimes several members come up to us at the end of the class and say, hey, I'd like to talk, you know, and we have the ability to just to use the soft skills that we talked about in the course. So, you know, and we've also, I know I'm kind of being a little long-winded here, we've also enacted other things that we found, you know, the mental health first aid. Mike talked about that particular piece. Mike Mareshi and Jimmy are trained to give that. And we've also done we've incorporated a Narcan training along with a little piece from the Samaritans. I believe everyone's familiar with that organization. So we've kind of found different ways to get into it. You know, the drugs are a piece of it. You know, the 6-hour course that we do is for first years. We've really chipped away at that, and we have a dialogue between the three of us. And again, we're fortunate. We have the three of us doing the course. We all have different takes, and we really encourage, you know, talking about it, and you'd be amazed how well it goes. You know, it's just worked out really, really well for us here. Big commitment from Jeff's business manager, Jeff Sullivan, and you know, we're happy to share what we have with you if you'd like to.
Steve, and one of the issues that, and this has come up before, is how do we take what's on the LMS and implement that into our training, in our training centers? Every district council has their own amount of time that they can utilize to present changing the culture of construction, or any other training specific whether it be craft specific or health specific. And what we've asked those that come in for the trainer to do is take this and use it, break it down, develop your own training, and whether you can train it in 15-minute increments or half a day increments or full day increments. Take that training, utilize that, and as we've heard today with Luke and Bob, the 2.5 day session is much more developed as far as that's concerned, and you can take a lot of that information and insert it into your training. So I think it's really important, like what Chris said, for each district council to use that as a guide, but build your own training in your district council.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, and I'll just kind of point out too, that is what we're doing. We got our champion Jennifer Sherman in here, and several others that are in here from DC 30. Like that's literally what we're working on now with the subcommittee, meant to build it out to the apprentice level, the journey worker level, and all that kind of stuff too. So perfect, appreciate it.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Mike, one of the things that the approach that we try to take is that it's an ongoing conversation. We're not trying to make them learn anything.
It's bringing it out into the open and
Talking
giving
about it.
everybody the freedom to have the discussion. And through that discussion, lives can be restored.
Mike, this is Bob. It's not one and done. It's like safety. We talk safety all the time. We should be talking person's mental health all the time.
Absolutely. Anybody else have any other questions? We greatly appreciate you staying another 20 minutes beyond the closing time of the session. So thank you all for your time. Really appreciate that.
Mike, I do have another question while the team's on here. And this is me, feel free to leave if you want, because this is now, I just appreciate having you guys in front of me. Obviously, there's a wave of medicinal cannabis, crossing the country, and then obviously moving into recreational as well. But I specifically just want to talk about medicinal because, doctors are notorious, like you mentioned, for prescribing opioids of all different sorts and all different strengths, along with antidepressants and anxiety meds and all that kind of stuff too. Where does this come into play with some? Now the construction industry in some cases is backing away from medicinal cannabis because of drug testing and possible losing their jobs. So their only option are those opioids. But in just the world in general, where's that acceptance level for somebody that uses a medication, whether it is the opioid or whether it is cannabis? Where's that accepted level to where that is okay to treat their pain, not either acute or chronic? Because we know that pain is real. We also know, and it's not just body, it's mind, body, and soul, everything. It's a really tricky area because in some cases, pain left untreated will also lead to everything that we're talking about that we're trying to prevent as well, mental illness and suicide and and so forth. So I'd like to hear from all of you, Luke specifically, kind of on this topic.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can give you a little bit of my personal philosophy on that one. And it's interesting, when we did this class in person, we've had people in Canada and Quebec and stuff like that, and the one guy that was in the class was like, man, that's like the weed capital of Canada, and their policies and procedures might have certainly been different from some other places like DC and things like that. my personal philosophy is, we work with a non-narcotic pain management doctor with a lot of our chronic pain clients that come in here, and a non-narcotic certainly makes a whole lot more sense in addition to holistic services. And Bob was talking about it, well, it's going to cost too much if you not just treat a symptom, which is pain, but treat underlying causes, conditions, and maybe treat it with non-narcotic pain meds. You might have more long-term benefit. We do all kinds of different medications that are prescription but aren't narcotics, and a lot of our chronic pain clients have good success with that when they throw in some acupuncture and take care of their mental and emotional health and aren't physically addicted to the pain pills anymore. Those are just some of the things that we do. So that's a little bit of my perspective on it. Pain meds were originally given to make the pain bearable, not to get rid of the pain and make you high, but how is it prescribed? So that's just my personal belief and what part of the culture that I give clients leaving here. I mean, the pain receptors become so raw when you become physically dependent on an opiate. So then there's a rebound effect when you get off of it and it feels really raw. But I've had people that are wheelchair bound because of their pain. In a matter of a month and a half, they're off of a walker and they realize I don't have as much pain as I originally thought I did because I'm off the opiates. So that's part of the culture too that we have to change, not just in the industry, but with the United States and all that.
And I think it's really important for us to know what are benefits, what do we receive from our benefits? Developing a relationship with our EAPs, really dig down. And that's one of the things that we've been asking the champions to do, is find out what those local resources are and really utilize those resources. Know them front and back so that when a member comes forward and says, I need some help in this area, that we've done that research and we can refer them out through the employee assistance program or the MAP, the member assistance program, and that they can get the help they need. Let's send them directly to the service that they need.
I'd like to add one thing. I'm always troubled by the focus of why states should legalize marijuana. Think of all the money we're going to get from taxing it. What a bizarre way to look at something that may harm people in society, versus what's the medical impact? What's all the other impact? So and then what I remember Michael's psychiatrist really stressing the impact that marijuana, especially with adolescents, can have on their development of their brain. And, most states are talking about this 18 and up. So it's troubling, but it's a wave right now going across the country.
And
if I could add.
go for it.
Okay, my name's David Yanelatis. I'm an MAP for District Council 9, Local Union 806 in New York City. I have probably 15 years and 9 months in recovery, and I've been interning for Pat McCora since he was running the program out of 8828A, which is the metal polishers up in New York. Because we are union and we have to subscribe to OSHA guidelines. That is our, the gospel according to OSHA, so to speak. At this current time, whether a state passes a rule or decriminalizes narcotics or marijuana, we still have to answer to a higher authority, which is OSHA. Because I've had that question come up in training sessions from the younger people. If you're using CBD oil for pain and you're applying it topically or to, to an extremity, that isn't as big a deal as the ones that are trying to smoke the pain away. So sadly, it does come back to the guidelines we operate under. With the, when we talk about strategies and stuff, and I actually had to make that point 4 times, because when we started our training back in 2018, we started with the apprentice classes and the people running the training center. And that's always going to have to be our guideline, as much as we want to be progressive, with pain management and such. And I agree with what Luke said about pain management. I'm a volunteer. I've been volunteering my time to the district council for 15 years. I have about almost over 14,000 contact hours with clients, and I have a lot of letters after my name, besides the OS. And those are the strategies that Pat and myself use. First of all, when somebody comes in, we treat the addiction first. Then we start with the psychological diagnosis second, because until we remove the mechanism of injury, which is the narcotics or the alcohol, we're not actually talking to the person. We're still talking to the addiction. We do our outpatient scheduling and such. When we started, we had 200 or 300 people helping us. We now have something close to like 3,000 providers and 400 facilities across the country. It was a lot of hard work to make that go. You have to temper what we're teaching them for safety versus what we have to do as EAPs. I'm already an LAP, labor assistance professional. So, and that's it. We don't want kids getting, or young people getting red X'd off a job, because after the trade center came down, everything below Canal Street was under federal guidelines. If you tested positive, you weren't allowed back. I think we got some of that overturned. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, David. All this ties into changing the culture of construction and building the IUPAT helping hand from sea to shining sea. And a lot of work has gone into this since that FIF at 2017. And I just want to thank you all for what you're doing in your district councils and will continue to do as we continue to move this forward. As we mentioned earlier, envisioning this just like CPR first aid at some point in time. And those apprentices right now that are learning this in district councils are that change of culture. They will have this in their 5th year, their 10th year, their 20th year into retirement. And that's where the culture gets changed, because then it's handed down. So again, thank you all for being here today. I appreciate it. Tom, do you want to close up or?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Again, thanks as people are dropping off. Thanks again for everyone to come on. And I would encourage, I know Steve had some questions about moving forward and where this, Mike, I'm sure will keep everybody in tune with where that goes, but there's a pretty good resource out there already with those programs, like I mentioned with Chris and Mike and from District Council 35. So maybe that's something we can learn from. They can learn from each other, and I'm sure obviously we can connect those folks to that as they continue to move forward with that. Besides that, I know Nicole will reiterate the survey. It's very important to us, for us as far as getting your class completion, as well as us finding out, how we can improve the class. So, again, I want to thank you guys for coming on. Hopefully the next time we do something, we're getting closer to hopefully getting everybody here back in Hanover. We want to do some more training here. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
See you.
Thanks, everyone. So long.